This queen and knight endgame looks equal, but there's a small problem. With the black pieces is playing Magnus Carlsen, and he weaves his endgame magic and leaves us with a beautiful masterpiece. In this game, we are going to uncover Carlsen's endgame magic. We are going to understand how did Carlsen win a position that the engine says equal. I believe there were 5 key moments where the decisions that Magnus made were different than the decisions that an average player would make. I hope you learn from them, and I hope you can apply those in your games. There's a lot to learn, so do stick around till the very end and let's begin. Black is playing Magnus Carlsen and with white is playing Aryan Tari, a very strong grandmaster from Norway, and the tournament where this game played was also Norway Chess 2021. So, before we begin to look for moves, the first thing we want to do here is we want to evaluate the position so that we understand what is going in black's favor and what is going in white's favor. Okay, so black has 5 pawns, white has 5 pawns, knight knight, queen queen, materially equal. There's one factor that gives black some hope to play for a win in this position, and that is black has these 2 pawns on the queen side and white has only 1 here. So black has a pawn majority on this side of the board, and whenever you have a pawn majority, your goal is to create a passed pawn on that particular side. Okay, so in this position, black can create a passed pawn on the queen side, and that passed pawn is going to be farther away for this king to stop. Whereas for the black king, to stop this pawn, it's relatively much closer to the black king. Now here, many players, what they would start to do is, okay, they see they have a chance to create an outside passer, they would push the pawn. But there is a problem with this, and that is, it allows white to activate their pieces. For example, white goes queen h5, hitting this pawn. Now what do? Black plays h6, now the queen comes to c5, pinning this knight. And again, there is a threat of knight f5. Many threats start to come. Okay, so that is not what you want to do. Okay, whenever you have, let's say, a chance to fight for an advantage in the endgame, you want to very slowly build up your position first. And Magnus plays a very nice move, g6. Magnus, what he does is, before he starts to push his queenside passed pawns, he says, I need to make sure my king has a nice breathing room, so that in the future, if there are any checks to the king, it can find safety. Okay, and you'll soon see this move makes a real difference to the position later on. Also at the same time, this move stops the white queen from activating here. So white finds another way to activate the queen. He plays queen f3. Now black plays king g7. Queen d5. White activates his queen. And once again, you don't want to rush here with a5. There is a pin on your knight. Just get out of that pin first. Okay, patience. Aryan plays a3. And now the second moment in the game, Carlsen plays a very nice move. Before I show you that move, here again, many players would like to push a5 because they would think, okay, I can play b4 and create some activity. But after knight g4, it's like white who's getting some play for his pieces. For example, knight g4, queen e7, queen c5, there is one more pin here. And so you see, slowly white's pieces are kind of being a problem for black. So you don't want to rush with the move a5 as of yet. Carlsen plays a very beautiful move, and that is queen to e6. Yes, after queen e6, fe6, you isolate your pawns. But without the queens on the board, it's going to be very difficult to stop these pawns from going forward. If you remove the knights, this would be a winning king and pawn endgame. Let me just show you a variation. For example, let's say white goes king f1, the knight can come forward, king e1, king f7, f3, knight c3. And let's say here, white decides that, okay, this knight could come here and threaten my pawn, and they play knight d1. In that case, after knight d1, king e7, this is a winning king and pawn endgame for black, because black can create an outside passed pawn here. For example, f4, a5. Now, this pawn will start to run, which means this king can quickly capture this pawn, whereas white king has to travel a little further to capture this pawn. Okay, like this captures, and now this king will simply come here and gobble up all these pawns. In the game, Aryan didn't play the move queen e6. He played the move queen to c5, keeping the queens on the board. Now, Carlsen plays the move knight e4. Once again, he's kicking away the enemy pieces. He's first activating his pieces, then he's going to start pushing the black pawns. Knight e4 happened, queen c2, the queen went back. And now another very nice move, h5. Okay. Now the idea of h5 is to give this king more breathing room. Okay. White played queen d3, knight d6. The knight can just blockade this pawn very nicely on this d6 square. Queen d2 happened, and now queen f6. Both players are shuffling their pieces a little. Knight d5, knight c4, hitting the queen. So if you capture, black would lose the queen, white would lose the queen also, and white doesn't want to go into an endgame without queens. So knight c4, queen c3 happened, queen d6, hitting the knight and also attacking this pawn. So the white knight jumps in the middle, and now Carlsen decides it's time to push the queen side pawns because all his pieces are fairly active. So he plays the move a5, hitting at this knight. The knight jumps back, and now Carlsen plays a4. Now this a3 pawn is a fixed weakness. It means as long as black's pieces here are going to keep an eye on this a3 pawn, white will not be able to move his pieces. Okay, like imagine if white moves their knight, they'll suddenly lose their a3 pawn. Okay, so you see how with a very timely a5, a4, Carlsen is able to fix the pawns and keep an eye on white's weakness. Aryan played the move queen d3, and now Carlsen plays the move h4. Now a benefit of playing this move h4 is now white cannot push this pawn to g4 or g3. And if white cannot push this pawn, it means this king kind of feels a little boxed in. White plays d5. And now Carlsen plays a beautiful move, queen e5, centralizing the queen. This queen just looks everywhere, in every direction. Okay, looks at the king and also it threatens to go there. Of course, not when the knight is here, but let's say if the knight moves, it can go there. Now Aryan makes a mistake. After knight e3, black has a winning position. The engine says this is a winning position. What will you play with the black pieces? Try to think. Here many players would just start to think whether knight e3 or knight d6. Instead, what Carlsen does is he first gives a check, queen to a1, king h2, and now queen e5 check. He plays this quickly, he gains time on the clock. Okay, remember this. Every time you can get a chance to gain time on the clock in the endgame, especially when you're attacking, you should do it. Okay, you should do it. And Carlsen does that here, king g1, and now this brings us to the fourth moment in the game. Now you can think for black. What can you play? Can you play knight e3? Can you play knight d6? You can think and decide. Okay, so in endgames, you can always improve your position. Okay, like Carlsen did, g6, h5. These were all position improving moves. But at some point, if you want to win an endgame, you have to sit down and you have to calculate. Like you have to sit down like this and you have to go and calculate. Okay, what do I play? Knight a3, fe3, queen a1. Okay, you cannot win an endgame on pure strategy. You have to at some point break through the position, and for that you have to calculate. Many players here, what they could do is they could go knight to d6. Black's position is fine, but how do you win this? That's not clear. Carlsen here backs his calculation and plays the move knight e3. fe3 happens. Carlsen has a chance to create an outside pass pawn here. So he creates one with the move b4. Very active move, creating counterplay or creating an outside pass pawn for black. Okay, b4. Now there is a very interesting situation for white. What should white do? If he takes a b4, there is queen a1 check, king h2, and now this pawn comes to a3. Now suddenly this queen is protecting this pawn. If white plays the move d6, black simply gives queen e5 check, king g1 and a2. And next move this pawn is queening and black is completely winning. So instead of that, in the game after b4, Aryan decided instead of wasting time and capturing this pawn, let me simply push my pawn. He plays the move d6. Now this pawn is 2 squares away from promotion. Carlsen also has to be fast on the queen side. He gives queen a1 check first, king h2, king f2, sorry, and now b into a3. Now this queen is protecting this pawn, which is why Carlsen gave queen a1 check in the first place. d7, okay, d7. Now there is a queen that could happen here. Carlsen plays queen f6 check, gets his queen back, king e2, and now once again there is a chance to play this position wrong. What would you play? Would you stop this pawn from queening with queen d8, or would you play something else? There is still a chance here to go wrong with the move queen d8. And after this, white is winning because this pawn is very far advanced. So white can play queen c3 check first, trying to come to c8. Now if the black king goes to f8, white's queen c8 is met with king e7, but white will not play that. White will play queen c5 check. so that this king doesn't come to e7. And once the king moves away, then the queen drops to c8. And this is winning for white. So there's still a chance to go wrong. So remember, you want to keep your calm in such positions. Keep your calm. Black plays a2. This pawn is just one square away from queening now. White makes a queen. Of course, there are two queens on the position, but black captures the queen. White captures, and now a1 queen. And this is the fifth moment. Remember, black started with the move g6 and king g7. We can see the benefit of that right now, because now white has simply no way to give a check to this black king. How will the white queen give a check? For example, if let's say white decides to go queen d4, that's the only way to give a check. a3, this king cannot come inside the square, so this pawn is simply going to queen on the next move. There is no check, and there is this diagonal that is covered by the queen. Queen into a5, queen into h4 happened, and now Carlsen plays a3. There is no way to stop this pawn. For example, let's say you play the move king to d3. Black is simply going to push a2. Next move, there is going to come queen b2 and a1 queen. Or let's say if white goes king d2, there is queen b2 check, king d3, a2. And next move, there is going to be a queen. So because of this, white resigned. Black won the game. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in another video. Bye bye.